Welcome to the Redeemed Vision podcast, where we bring sight to the blind and freedom to those enslaved by our pornified culture. Here, we dive into hard but important topics, such as pornography, sexual identity, true freedom, real love, and living marriage well. Go deep with us as we uncover what Redeemed Vision means for each of us living in the world today. Come to know yourself, the power of redemption through Jesus Christ, the joy of laughter, and how to live in gratitude and wonder. This is Redeemed Vision.
Howdy. Welcome to the Redeemed Vision podcast. I'm your host, Steve Pokorny. Yes, I'm here in Texas, and I think all of you should be as well. That's just my own personal opinion. In honor to have you, the Redeemed Vision podcast is an outreach of freedom-coaching.net, of freedom coaching, where we are working to set the blind free from the pornified culture. It's an honor to have you here. We have a great show ready for you. An honor to have you. And before we get into that again, a little bit of housekeeping items. First off, just some of our sponsors. First is Catholic Casts, and this is a beautiful, beautiful apostolate that has a collection of recordings over 2 decades of Catholic conferences that can't be found anywhere else in the world. And this has a very low price of $9.95 a month, and it helps to develop the gift of yourself and to discover practical ways to live out the will of God in your life. Definitely something to check out. The other sponsor we have is Voyage Comics, and most Christian media, it's pretty terrible, or it has been. It's getting better, but it still has work to do. And Voyage Comics is certainly not terrible. It's the exact opposite. It provides amazing stories. They're rooted firmly in the Catholic faith, and anyone can pick them up every age and enjoy them. And you're going to discover a world of awesome stories, and you're going to support this mission of the Redeemed Vision podcast. Also, as I mentioned, the Redeemed Vision podcast is an outpouring and outreach of freedom coaching, freedom-coaching.net. We have a lot going on with what we do, not just our coaching, but a little bit about our coaching. It's one-to-one mentoring designed to break the attraction permanently to pornography, to unchaste behavior in both men and women through a transformation of mind, heart, and vision. So we want to encourage you, don't just quit, be transformed, break the power of porn. And last piece, if you want to help this apostolate grow, if you want to help freedom coaching, help with scholarships, help with a bunch of other elements, other things that we're doing, you can check out those things at freedom-coaching.net. We have a foundation. We are a 501c3. We're a nonprofit, and your donations will go to helping immensely many people who are wounded and hurt, especially by our pornified culture, by the culture that is lost and confused about the issues of the body, sexuality, about love and intimacy and marriage and family. We are a bright light in this darkness, and the light is getting brighter. And your gift would help to provide more fuel for this. Whatever you are willing to offer, we are gracious to receive it. You can go right over to our website to get that set up, and right to where it says donate. Okay. And the last and most important thing of this mission, of our conversation here, please like this. Hit the bell if you got a bell there. Don't get your bell rung. Do that. Subscribe to this podcast, and we want to help get the word out about these very important topics. Okay, very important here. And just as a warning, perhaps a little bit on this podcast, this is going to be perhaps a tough subject to kind of go into. So a listener discretion is advised. So any moms or dads out there, you're listening with little ones, you might want to wait until they are out of earshot, or they're in bed or wherever, and so you can focus on this podcast and be able to talk about these things in an appropriate age-appropriate setting when the time comes. Now, I mentioned in just the introduction here that we live in a pornified world. We have pornified images are everywhere. What's a pornified image? Well, these are images that encourage the use and abuse of others. And we may have been programmed to think these images and behaviors are normal. Well, what if I told you that pornographic images are anything but normal? In fact, they keep us from truly developing fully into who we're made to be. What if I told you that pornography doesn't help us mature, but actually makes us sexually immature? Well, I told you, the desire for pornified images and behaviors stems from some sort of brokenness and lack of healthy sexual development from a person's past. Intrigued? Curious to learn more? Well, I'm not the one who's going to take the lead on this subject, but my guest today has a great passion and a wealth of practical knowledge and wisdom about the subject of psychosexual development and pornography. And I'd like to introduce you to a woman who became a good friend to me through our work in freedom coaching. I'd like to introduce Claudia Perez, and she holds a master's in safeguarding by the Pontifical University of Mexico, a diploma in prevention of sexual abuse of minors by the Pontificia Universidad Gregoriana. She's going to correct my Spanish hardcore, and is a specialist in theology of the body. Her professional experience includes serving as a trauma specialized counselor in Mexico and as an international speaker. Her experience of healing and reintegration has driven her 20 plus years of work helping families, teens, and young adults find meaning and order in their sexuality. She has her own private practice in Mexico, but also serves as a freedom coach to both women and men, of which I am truly grateful for. And I've gotten to witness her work personally, and it's beautiful. And she truly is a woman who is in tune with the Holy Spirit. And I think that you're going to experience a little bit of what I've seen, and it's pretty remarkable. Most importantly, the most important thing about Claudia is that she's married. And she has a husband. Yes, that's usually how it works. And been married nearly 30 years and has 5 beautiful children. So without further ado, Claudia Perez, welcome to the Redeemed Vision Podcast.
I loved the introduction. Yeah, and my husband would truly agree that that's the most important part of me. And I find joy.
He better.
Yeah. I find joy
Awesome.
in saying that first and foremost, I'm a daughter of God, a wife, and a mother, and then the rest.
Amen.
And I thank you so much for having me here. I'm really looking forward to it. I want to share what I've experienced in myself and in helping other people.
Awesome. And we've been talking for quite a few months, like we need to get you back on the podcast. And so I do invite listeners. There's an earlier recording going into your background, more about your history. Then I encourage that part of the story is important. And that's not going to be our focus today as we go into this. But I do want to ask you a question, Claudia, as we kick off here. How many liars does it take to screw in a light bulb?
I don't know.
None.
How many?
They
None.
use gaslighting.
Oh my God.
I couldn't resist.
I'm gonna make a contribution to that joke, so it's better. How many narcissists do you need to screw on a light bulb?
Tell me.
None.
Oh yeah, we can add that. It's all gaslighting. Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely, right. And I asked that question. Yes, I want to get a laugh out of you, and give you a laugh, but and also give those who are listening to this podcast that we're not just all serious all the time. We have a ton of fun in what we do, but the matters that we're talking about are serious, right? And so we're gonna drive into this here, and in the subject of our this topic of the subject of our podcast today is we're looking at this issue of psychosexual development and pornography, and just so we're both on the same page, and I know this is not new to you, Claudia, but for all those who are hearing this, I want to make sure we define pornography correctly, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, and it can derail our conversation if we don't get this right. So the way we define pornography here is that it's any image, written, or audio that's intentionally designed to try to get a person to use a person as a means of one's own selfish sexual gratification. Okay, so that's pretty broad, because and then we can see how this is impacted in movies, magazines, television shows, obviously the stuff that we've seen online and hear online, right? So Claudia, with that said, with that definition laid out, right, this issue of psychosexual development and pornography is like, why are you so interested in this subject?
Well, first of all, because of my own history, I suffered from a sexual compulsion for 16 years approximately, and then achieved sobriety for probably 20 years more. And it wasn't until I looked into, thanks to great counselors, great spiritual directors, I looked into my history of development, including what traumas were there, what needs weren't addressed, that I could recognize how this compulsion and all other behaviors I didn't that were damaging to myself had developed, and why. And the most important part was that all these could be healed, right? And the unaddressed needs could also be addressed in different ways, probably not in the ways that I needed them at the age where they were supposed to be addressed, but that I could do this healing path and have been on it since I'm now 53 years old and free, thank God. And then one thing, ministry, theology of the body, one thing led to another, and I ended up being a trauma therapist. And I've been bringing this approach to clients and to youth who also ask for spiritual guidance to help them find what they need to heal, also through healing prayer, as you well know. But there's always this area. We are a unit. We're heart, mind, soul. We're spirit, body, heart, however you want to call it. But we're a unit.
All 5 of those.
Yeah, all 10 of those. It's me, myself, and
I don't think 10, but okay.
Sometimes there's 10 of us there, but usually it's me, myself, and I. And and everything that
those are the only people who make sense sometimes in my life.
Yeah. So it's it's helping guide people through a reintegration of themselves towards integrated sexuality. In the end, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for freedom, aren't we?
Yeah, and I loved when you were describing this, where the what the drive was when you got to I'm free, right? That you lit up and voice lit up, and this is exactly that's the hope of this entire conversation, right?
Yes.
Is the message that freedom is really possible, right? And
It is.
Anybody who's been a listener of this podcast knows a bit of my story, right? And what drives this, and that's our dog in the fight here. That this is not a shame-based approach. This is not what we're looking to do, but really are looking to get to the root of issues so there can be healing. We are highlighting tonight, and some of these. What are some of those root issues that would drive us into behaviors that we find just aren't healthy, that we can consider destructive here, right? And pornography use would be one of those. So we define pornography, Claudia. So let's define this term, psychosexual development. What would you say about that?
Before that, I would like to add, in my work with women who are attached to pornography, I've found that also pornography leads them to use themselves and let others use them. So it's not only something that takes you to use someone for your own sexual gratification selfishly, but it also takes us, and I see this more in women than in men, to the use of oneself. And that's a concept that is very difficult to grasp for a lot of people, that we can use ourselves. And the opposite of love is not hate, is use. And I would like to add that to the definition, if I may.
Absolutely, and even, but I want to, before you go into define psychosexual development, right? This is we like to teach in freedom coaching, right? The six deepest desires of the human heart: to see and be seen, to know, be known, to love and be loved, right? We ache for this, and when we don't find those, right? And I think this will dovetail well into work we're going to topic today. Then we go searching in other ways, and so we allow others to do things to us. We allow ourselves to do things to ourselves. If that's a very awkward way to put it, but it fits. So. Right. Mi español es pobre, pero aquí. But within this here, I barely know English, so we're working with people. We're working with what we got. So with this here, right? It's that before we can solve a problem, we have to know what the problem is, and also I would add to that, know what is good. What is the goal we're supposed to be going for in the first place? Most people have these big emotional wounds going on, and they just think this is normal. This is just the way life is, and there's no real escape from this. And I just have to kind of endure. I just got to kind of trudge through the day, and it's not exactly the way we were meant to be, right? So in that, to help with that, right? Thank you. So within this, so go back to that definition. How the psychosexual development? What is this all about? What is that? How would you start with a definition, please?
Yeah, well, the first well-known theorist who coined the term, so to speak, would be Freud, who has been shunned in many areas, but there's still a lot to rescue from what he found from his investigations and observations of the human person. But we can now speak of a personalistic approach to psychosexual development, which would be, well, personalistic philosophy is a school of thought that is centered around the person, and it's very much in tune with Christian anthropology. They actually, one of its most renowned exponents nowadays is John Paul II, or Saint John Paul the Great. He's recognized both by religious and secular alike as one of the most important personalism proponents. And it's this thought of the person being the center for all studies, from an ontological point of view, from an existentialist point of view. For theology, for anthropology, the person is the center. And this is very much in tune also with scripture, since the human person is the culmination of creation, right? So in studying what the person is, what the person desires, how the person finds fulfillment, is that we can know what we are meant for. So integrating several schools, also the developmental theories from Erikson, which are we could speak of emotional development in the person, how we go during stages growing into an emotional mature personality. Freud, as I said, he was dedicated more to the integration of a sexually mature personality. There's a lot to rescue there if we read him right. And also the school of Piaget, who outlined the stages of cognitive development. So if you see, they are speaking of this integrity, this one thing we are. They're speaking of emotions, of rationale, of body impulses. And again, this speaks to me of an integrated person, just as God created us: body, soul, mind. So
heart and body, right?
Yeah, heart and body.
Heart and spirit.
I don't know if I responded to the question. So it's an approach.
Well, no. Along those. Sorry, here, please continue.
So in other words, is to realize we go through stages that involve all of our areas, all of our dimensions as a person, that contribute to, with the needs and tasks that we need to accomplish during those stages, contribute to the conformation of a mature personality, which includes our sexuality, because we are sexed. We are created sexed. So a mature personality would also reflect on a mature sexuality. So psychosexual development speaks of this, how the growth in these areas of our life also have an impact on the development of our sexual identity, our sexual personality, and that includes a wide range of, from behaviors, desires, thoughts, etc.
So this is beautiful, and again, to make this clear for our audience, right? I think there's why this is so important is there's such a crazy confusion in our culture about these issues of sexuality, right? And this psychosexual development. We are developing who we are to truly be in the sight of God, who God has created us to be, right? But this begs a very important question that I'll have you illuminate here is, we use these, and again, so again, a lot of this is defining terms. And when we define terms, is a dangerous thing to do, because once we define something, we say what something is not. And that is something in the postmodern world doesn't want to accept that, because they want everything to go. But what we want to say is there's, just like when we play a game of soccer, right? The goal is to score goals so you can win, right? There's, and in classical philosophy, it's the telos. What's the end of it? What's the purpose of it? What's the meaning behind it, right? And I think all of us want this meaning. So our sexuality has a purpose. There's a goal. There's a telos to it, right? And we would say the goal is to love, to bring us to love. But before we can get into the just the telos, we have to get to philosophical term, the isness, the what'sness, right? Which is hard. Doesn't translate well into English. I don't know if it translated well in Greek when Plato was using it, but here we are. So these terms of sexuality and sex, how would you define those, and how would you, again, precise, as succinct as you can, because we can do a whole seminar on this.
Oh, I know.
How would you, right? How would you just to define those and distinguish those?
Yeah.
Sexuality and sex.
Yeah. So coming from a philosophical approach, personalism, but also personalism brings from existentialism, humanism. So we can say, and just science, sex is the biological characteristics of a person, which includes physiological, anatomical, genetical, endocrinological, endocrine system. Sorry for my English.
It's all science. It's all science here, folks.
Science, so it sounds, as long as you say
sciencey,
logical,
very sciencey.
And by the way, emotions are also a mixture of biology and psychology.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, from that, in general, in Spanish, I don't know if that happens like in English. We have this distinction between what is sex and what is genitality. I didn't even find a translation for that. But this word in Spanish, genitalidad, comes from Latin genitalis, which it means that which engenders, that which
engenders, and maybe is generate in there as well.
Yes, generate is there as well. So genitality would encompass everything that has to do with our reproductive organs, with our genitals, our secondary sex characteristics, such as external characteristics, such as breasts in women, genitals, hair, different areas of hair for men and for women,
all that.
All that. But also the felt senses, or the sensations that come from these genitals and reproductive organs. Speaking of pleasure, for instance, in our genitals, that's pertain to genitality. And I like to make the distinction because sometimes we assign to the whole concept of sexuality, which is much broader, we assign the concept of pleasure as it being like the most important part of sexuality. I don't know how to explain this, but
you're doing well.
Like giving it too much of a place. How would you say it?
The focus. I think a better way to say it perhaps is we have reduced the person to their sexuality, and in this case, sexuality means the pleasure that one receives or gives.
So let me rephrase that.
We want to make. So please go ahead.
We have reduced the person to its genitality. We have reduced sexuality to genitality. We we think that the expression of sexuality has only to do with the pleasure that our genitals and sexual activity can give. Yeah, would you agree? Oh, I can't hear you.
You can't, because I muted my mic, unfortunately. We want to make that's when I mute the mic, you can't hear. That's how it works. It's weird. But what we want to say here is that we are way more than just this momentary pleasure. To see it's and that would be unlikewise with what we see with pornography. In pornography, we've reduced men and women down to what they are doing in that moment with their bodies, and that is viewed as, and the message is, that's the most important part. And I think this is a great problem, because what we want to say is everything we do with our bodies is either male or female, and those sexual terms, but it may have very little, if not anything, to do directly with our genitals. Right? Mary, exactly. in a marriage, Claudia, right? We are it is very important, the time when husbands and wives come together for one flesh union. Very important, right? But it's a very, very small yet important moment. But it's there. The married life is much more than this. And so when we are, as a single person, for instance, if that is where our focus is on satisfying what we consider to be a need there, then it's going to color our worldview. And a lot of that coloring there, and that's where I'd like to move the conversation to, is a form of sexual immaturity. Now, before we go, I mentioned telos, right? The goal here, right? So if the goal is to be sexually mature, what does that look like? How would you describe that?
Yeah. Well, it would be the integration of all aspects of sexuality. So we do have genitality, and by the way, porn reduces a person to body parts, and usually just the body parts that are secondary sexual characteristics, right? They don't even have to do with the actual reproductive organ, for instance, the womb and the uterus and the ovaries of the woman. Those are the primary. And you know which is the organ that is the primary sexual organ? I'm
going to say either the heart or the brain.
The brain. You got it on the second prime. Points, A-.
All right, I got an A-. Got to work to be an A. Here we go. That's why we're all in class together with Dr. Perez. Here we go.
Yes. So a mature sexuality would mean that we have integrated, as you said, our genitality to all other aspects of our life according to the state in which we are. And by state, I mean age, developmental state in our life, whether we're a teen or an adult, for instance, our life, if we're married, single. And notice that since you mentioned marriage, actually happiness in marriage has to do a lot more with the other 9%. Like, say if the intimate union is in time proportion, it's 10% of what a marriage lives, right? It is very important, and it's God's calling. And it's so important that the processes that happen in the marital union, the hormonal processes that happen, help to strengthen the marriage. But that won't happen if the other 90% is not loving each other, is not growing with each other, is not giving of ourselves. There's so much more involved in our happiness. And as you said today, sometimes it seems that the focus should be only on the genital, with all that encompasses the having sexual relations here and there, and the pleasure, and then self gratification. So that's the opposite, because that's a disintegration of these areas.
Yes.
And you're not only having an equilibrium, a balance of all of them, but you're focusing so much on the genitality that it actually becomes deintegrated from yourself.
Disintegrated.
Disintegrated. Thank you. And
Yes.
that's a disintegrated personality as well. You could what's a
Absolutely.
mature personality? How someone who is, balanced in all his areas, you would say. The same goes for sexuality. There has to be a balance between what is my sex, what is how I express my sexuality, between the experience of genitality and also the experience of erotism. That's another word that has been reduced to a very, very confusing meaning. The
The
origin of
erotic.
the erotic is like, it's so different from what it really means. According and talking about Plato, you mentioned Plato a while ago. Sophocles said that eros was a passionate joy. Plato
Mm.
used to say that it's an inclination that inflames or grows and in the face of that which is beautiful. It's an impulse towards the meditation about the world and existence. That's what
Wow.
eros is. It's an innermost impulse in the human person towards the meditation about the world and the existence itself. It's also been defined as by these classical philosophers from old as the ascension unto the contemplation of that which is divinely beautiful.
Yes.
And
And if I can jump in here, because I want to keep our time is tight
yes,
here, but I want to make sure we stay here, just so we recap here, right? The human person is mind, heart, body, soul, spirit, right? Those 5 elements together. Everything we do, understood properly, is sexual. Okay. It might involve our genitals, maybe, very rarely, right? But everything we're doing, because we're male or female, right? And getting this understanding down is critical. How we view ourselves, how we view others, how we interact with others in the world, how we build relationships, everything we do, right? Everything that we are in a certain sense comes from this, right? So, and a sexually mature person, so we can make it clear so everybody's hearing this, is working towards that integration. Because there's original sin, because we experience concupiscence, the desire to be selfish, right? We're going to find areas in life that are not going to be integrated. This is going to be a work, an arduous work. And this is why baptism, this is why our Christian faith, our Catholic faith, is so darn important, because we are empowered by grace, especially sacramentally, to love as Christ loves. And in doing that, in entering into this, we actually experience some healing that happens.
yes.
And that's a beautiful experience, right? So on here, right, there's the call of sexuality, right? To live out our sexuality is a calling to love, a calling to make a gift of self, right? But you, I, most of us listening to this podcast, right? We didn't get the message growing up. There was brokenness. There were certain needs that were not met, right? So how would you say, Claudia, right? How would you say these unexpressed needs, these unaddressed needs, they affect our sexuality and especially impacts a person's pursuit of pornography use?
Yes. Even Freud spoke of this. He's very, he's cited frequently by postmodern ideologists, but he spoke of this. He spoke of how, for instance, how fetishes are born and fixations are born. So what happens if my basic emotional, cognitive, and sexual needs that weren't addressed from the time I was born, or I would argue even conceived, to my adultness, I will be trying unconsciously or semi consciously trying to satisfy those needs forever and ever. And sometimes this shows up in terms of attachment issues in relationships. For instance, staying in toxic relationships, living out in a promiscuous lifestyle, like trying to find love in all places, like what you said a while ago.
All the wrong places, right?
All the wrong places, yes. And that includes also sexual fantasies, masturbation, attachment to pornography, attachment to masturbation as compulsions, infidelity as well, and also distortions of our sexuality. Freud himself defined a mature sexual, like the last stage that he outlines. Each of these theorists that I mentioned outline different stages, and they have some similar. They are very similar. They overlap. He defined the last stage, which is the mature state, as someone whose sexual orientation is towards the opposite sex.
Hmm.
He did it, and this is based
That's
on
fascinating, especially given the world we live in, right?
yes. So our contemporary ideologists don't forget. They forget that Freud said that, right? So
Yeah.
so we might include also in this how these wounds or how these unaddressed needs show up also in distortions of our sexual orientation, of our sexual identity, and of our sexual roles, how we understand. So these are also important parts of in sexual maturity, is that our identity, because our identity is sexual. We are sexed. We were born, created sexed. So
Male or female?
when I think of my personal identity, I'm thinking in terms of the sex that I am. I am a woman, and I am a woman that likes to talk a lot, and I'm the rest of the personality. But Freud would say sexual identity, gender identity, which is how I express and externally express my sexuality, sexual roles, how I identify the roles, and that it's a combination of my biological characteristics, psychic, my psychology, and the social influence, like family and the rest. And there's three, and how my orientation all integrate into who I am. So if I am a woman, a mature sexuality would say that my identity, my sexual identity, my gender identity, my sexual role or roles, how I perceive them. For instance, how I perceive being a mom, a professional, a wife, a sister, etc., and my sexual orientation are all in tune with the sex that I am, and
Very, very, very important.
and taking that philosophically also, how they orient towards what I'm meant to be, towards my fulfillment as a person. Am I
And
making
if I, yeah, oh, you're making complete sense. And just to cap this, is why do we want to even consider this? Why would we want to do this? Is because when we're in alignment with our true self, when we're living an integrated life as much as is possible, right? There's always things to work out, right? In my own life, just ask my wife, right? But I'm working on that. That's why marriage is for the rest of my life. So with this, though, that integration of sexuality, right? As much as we are in alignment with what that is, this is where we find joy, peace,
yes
and fulfillment. That peace of heart that mere pleasure cannot provide us, right? So last question here, right? And we can always jump on and revisit it, because this is not a topic that bottoms out, because it has to do with all of humanity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Somebody recognizes that, right, there's some things that are not in alignment, that I'm experiencing immaturity in certain areas. What are 3 ways that they can begin to address that, begin to, seek healing in those areas? What would you say to them?
Well, one of them would be get to know yourself. And for this, we have so many tools available. I would recommend, for instance, Dr. Bob Schutz's book, Be Healed. He has a wonderful explanation from his approach towards psychosexual development and exercises that help you do this introspection. Get to know yourself.
Yes.
In getting to know yourself, I would say get to know where your wounds are manifesting, or where these unaddressed needs are manifesting, and these are the behaviors that seem to make you happy, but in the end they don't, and you have to be really honest with yourself, and then find out which are the true desires, the true needs that are not supposedly being addressed by these behaviors. What is it that we really need? That would be one. The second, I would say, go to counseling. Sometimes these wounds are so deep, so deeply rooted that we need the counseling for this. We need therapy, or spiritual accompaniment, coaching, good coaching. So come to Freedom Coaching, where we integrate all of this into the program. We're not a
Agree.
therapeutic or counseling service, but we do integrate. Wouldn't you say?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. Third one. Well, here, do you have a third one? Yeah. What's the third one?
Yeah, I do. And this is the biggest lesson I've learned through my clients and through myself. Trust that the Lord wants to meet you where you are. We are often so ashamed, so burdened by shame, not guilt. Guilt is just knowing I did something wrong. Shame by our disordered sexuality, our disordered sexual wants, fantasies, and behaviors that we try to hide, like Adam, right? Adam and Eve hiding from the Lord. Um, I've seen, I know, and I've experienced that it is by opening our brokenness to Him that we can truly start our part towards healing. He wants to meet us in the mud that we're in. And sometimes, I just told a client that today, you might not realize, but there's so much trauma in your life that maybe if you hadn't developed this compulsion and hadn't come for help, you wouldn't have the opportunity of healing. So this is, for me, a way that the Lord proves that He really does want to meet us in our brokenness. And we need to trust that. Take that to prayer. Take that to the Lord. Take the worst, what you think is the worst in you, take it and open it to the Lord. Because that's where He wants to meet you. And He's going to not only, sometimes we go, please take this behavior from me, take this compulsion away, we want to heal that. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to be healed, and He wants to do it, and that's where He wants to meet you.
I can't end this on any better note than that, right? Let Jesus have His way, because I think in our wounds, in our hurts, right, we're very myopic. We're very focused on that area because the pain is screaming so loudly, right? As C.S. Lewis once wrote, that it's God whispers in our pleasures, but he shouts through our pain.
Oh,
Pain
wow.
is the megaphone that God uses to rouse a sleeping world. Right. And many of us have been sleeping, but in this case, what we've been talking about, right, where there's been disintegration, is the fact that we think this is just the way life is. And we want to say, okay, life is like it is right now. But guess what? It's meant to also be healed. And there's a path forward to a better tomorrow, right? To live life in a very healthy way, right? So Claudia, I want to thank you so much. What's the best way for people to get to know you more, get in touch with you?
Well, go to freedom-coaching.net and you'll find me on the coach's page. That's how you can get in touch with me.
Amen. Amen. And I want to say I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for the work that you do. I'm grateful for this conversation. And this is not the last time we're going to have this conversation on this podcast, I'm sure. So and Claudia, we'll chit chat in just a minute. So hold the line there. But to all of those who have heard this, I want to say thank you for entering in here. And if there's any of value, again, I encourage you to like this, to share this. and to comment, right? Because this is a message that need to get out to the world, and like that are who we are, right? It's not simply the mistakes that we do. We're more than the sum total of our mistakes and failures, but we're the sum total of our Father's love for us, right? And the capacity to live in the image of Christ Jesus, to paraphrase the words of John Paul II. For all of us here at the Redeemed Vision podcast, I'm Steve Pokorny, and remember, nothing is wasted, everything